Well, it's nearly the greatest holiday of the year, Easter, the one that we all look forward to. So we figured, why don't we talk about some really messed up celebrations from yesteryear.
From yesteryear.
Yesteryear.
I like it. I like that yesteryear's over there as well.
It's right over there.
Do you have Easter plans?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and find some eggs, you know? See if I can spot that rabbit.
Just like the Lord wanted.
Exactly. That's what he always dreamt of.
Oh my god. All right. Well, with that,
let's get into it.
take it away.
Let's start things off with Immurement. This is the practice of building a structure around someone, sealing them alive inside of it. They, of course, eventually suffocate or die of starvation. It'd be a pretty slow, agonizing, scary way to die. Different cultures from around the world in different periods of time have used this as a form of punishment, but in medieval Europe, for some reason, there was this superstitious belief that sacrificing people by entombing them inside of buildings or bridges would bring good luck and strength to the foundation, and the best people to sacrifice the innocent, of course, especially in churches, in order to ward off all those forces of evil. Gotta make sure you have some good-hearted innocent souls built into the walls to scare away the devil. Physical evidence of this practice started cropping up in the 1800s when some of these structures started getting demolished. In one case, for example, the skeleton of a young boy was found built into the foundation of a bridge in Germany.
All right. Well, I mean, James was really on to something with that intro, and this is the perfect timing to discuss this one, considering today, the day that you're viewing this, is Good Friday, which is the holiday in which this ritual takes place. I'm sure many of us have heard of the practice of crucifixion before, but I honestly did not know that this was a practice still used today, but also that there is a day and entire ritual dedicated to it. In most places around the world, crucifixion is banned for a very good reason, but in a small village in the Philippines, this is an event that can still be witnessed, and people even sign themselves up for it. During the annual Lent, worshippers take to reenacting the days of Christ by crucifying themselves in order to repent for their sins, show their commitment to the Lord, and as a thank you. This practice involves real nails being pierced through their hands and feet and the whole 9 yards of terribleness. There's actually one man, Ruben Anahe, who in 55 years of his life has participated in this practice 27 times. That is absolutely wild. His last experience, however, came on Good Friday in 2013. He was fine, he just decided to retire from the rituals, which fair enough, I feel like he repented enough.
Next on the list we have Viking Yule. So the Viking Yule festival sounded like it was pretty pleasant for the most part. Some of our modern Christmas traditions were inspired by Yule. They'd feast, they'd burn the Yule log, Yule tree, drink heavy amounts of booze. That's Christmas, baby. Oh, and then you had human sacrifice. Every 9th year during Yule, there would be a total of 81 human sacrifices spanning over 9 days. Yes, kings would sacrifice 9 men per day. Their heads would be offered to the gods. It's one way to ring in the holiday season. Less gifts for the following year. It's not like human sacrifice was unique to the Vikings or anything, though. This is something cultures all over the world that practice, but it is funny that this would happen around what was otherwise this very celebratory time.
Next up, we have Pharmakos. This is a ritual that comes to us from ancient Greece, and basically, it was just a ritual that allowed them to place all their blame on just one unlucky person in the village. Essentially, what would happen is that one person, usually a criminal or a societal outcast in some way, would be chosen as a human scapegoat. The idea was that this scapegoat would be able to take on the impurities of the entire community. They would be paraded through the city while being subjected to humiliation and other forms of torment before their horrible fate of either being exiled or having their life taken. Kind of reminds me of that scene in Game of Thrones where they're like, shame, shame, walking her through the spoilers, but if you haven't seen it now, it's your own problem. Pharmakos was usually conducted during times of disaster like famine, plague, or invasion, and it was sort of a way for the people to make themselves feel better, I guess. Definitely just goes to show that even since the ancient times, humans have had a way of trying to find someone to shoulder all the blame instead of maybe taking some accountability and initiative. I think we all know someone like this.
Next on the list we have the Celtic origins of Halloween, Samhain. I love Halloween, candy, costumes, horror movies. I wish Halloween was a month-long affair. Kind of like Christmas, just comes way too early and then leaves too late. But if Samhain was still a thing, I'd be paralyzed with fear about the following year's celebration as soon as the current year's Samhain ended. Like, oh God, gotta do this all again next year. Oh, can't we just skip it this year, Mom? Just sing more of the Christmas songs, the little Rudolph and the snowman. Alright, so Samhain was believed to be the day of the year where the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead were lifted, and on the night of Samhain, the dead, along with the creatures, like fairies and demons, would walk amongst the living. Candles would be lit and placed in people's homes in order to guide the dead back to the afterlife. Pumpkins would also be hollowed out and lit. Now, that stuff sounds like familiar, Halloween type traditions, but what we don't practice now is animal and human sacrifices to appease the Celtic gods of death. Oh, and those pumpkins that were lit, it's said that they would be filled with fat from previous sacrifices and lit. Just a little bit more hardcore than sticking a candle from Dollarama.
Next up on our list today, we have Buzkashi. Okay, I'll be honest. This one is a little bit more of a game rather than a ritual, but I am so surprised that I have never heard of this one before. This game originated among the nomadic tribes between China and Mongolia between the 10th and 15th centuries, and now this is actually the national sport of Afghanistan. Little fun trivia fact for you there, I guess. Essentially, what this game is a horse-mounted game where players attempt to get what they are playing with in a goal. This doesn't sound so weird. A lot of sports with similar ideas: get the ball in the goal, the hoop, what have you. This is all fine and well, until we realize that the thing they are trying to get into the goal is the carcass of a goat or calf. Yeah, everyone's just riding around on horseback trying to get a dead animal into the goal. Maybe a little less fun than we originally thought. Imagine if they had the equivalent of like the Super Bowl for this game. Don't think we'd see Taylor Swift in the stands at this one.
Alright, next on the list is Buddhist Mummification. Now, I'm not speaking to the religious beliefs behind this or anything like that. I'm just gonna outline the practice, which sounds pretty horrific to me. This has been outlawed since the early 1900s. So what some Buddhists in Japan would decide to do was mummify themselves, which was not an easy practice. This was a very long, drawn-out ritual. First, the Buddhist in question would have to eat nothing but nuts and seeds just to drop a ton of weight and get all the fat off. Following this stage, which would last, I think it's said to be up to 1,000 days. That's a long time to just be eating nuts. But following this, though, they'd move on to eating nothing but bark and root from pine trees. Then they drink a poisonous tea containing the sap of an urushi tree. This tea would cause stuff to come out both ends. Real bad time on the toilet. This is to help rid the body of its moisture. After this stage, the Buddhist would be sealed inside a small stone room. Here we are back to Immurement again. And then they just sit there and wait to die. 1,000 days after death, the other Buddhists would peer in to see if the mummification worked, and if it did, it was thought they'd have achieved true enlightenment, becoming one with the Buddha, and a celebration was held.
They'd be like, you didn't have enough nuts and seeds. Next up on our list today, we have Famadihana. This is a tradition that originated in Madagascar during the 17th century, and it is based on the belief that the faster a body decomposes, the faster it will reach the afterlife. With this knowledge, it definitely makes a lot more sense as to why this festival comes around and is performed every few years. During the celebration, the participating Malagasy will dig up the remains of their deceased relatives, rewrap the corpses in fresh cloth, as well as rewriting their name on the fresh cloth, so as to ensure the loved one will never be forgotten. The people participating in the ceremony then will dance to live music while carrying the corpses over their heads while they go around the tomb before returning the deceased to the family tomb. This definitely isn't the only time in history that certain civilizations or cultures have practices of digging up their past relatives. It is sort of similar to an ancient Mexican practice where people would dig up their loved ones and paint their faces, and at the end of the day, this practice may seem strange in the Western world, but for the Malagasy, they believe it was a way to celebrate the life lived by the person, which, I don't know, I think is kind of cool.
Next on the list, we have the practice of Sati. So this was a practice in India where a widow would sit on her husband's funeral pyre when it was lit, dying in the process, of course. This was viewed as a way for a woman to demonstrate her devotion and loyalty to her husband, even in death. Sati was most prevalent in India during ancient and medieval times, but instances of it continued even into the 19th century. It was often more glorified in religious texts and stories, portraying the widow as this ultimate its symbol of devotion and purity, but that's not to say it was accepted and glorified all across India. There were plenty of texts that condemned it as well. There were also cases where women had been forced to commit the practice as well. Sati was outlawed in 1827.
All right, and finally on our list today we have Cobra Gold. Okay, maybe I'm absolutely out to lunch, but this is a crazy practice that I was so surprised I had never heard of before. Cobra Gold is an annual exercise that got its start back in 1982, which I know isn't ancient, you don't have to tell me, but I couldn't not include this one today. Basically, the idea of Cobra Gold was to improve coordination between the United States and the Thailand army in both hostile as well as humanitarian efforts. Now, this has become a multinational practice that involves a lot of practical training like field training exercises and disaster relief exercises, but the craziest part I found was the jungle survival training that teaches them how to live off the land. These exercises included things like drinking snake's blood, eating insects, and just generally consuming the wildlife found around them. It's essentially just training on how to survive if you ever found yourself stuck in a place where resources to live are scarce. Definitely a very practical and reasonable explanation, but pretty hardcore nonetheless. Alright, would you participate in any of these practices?
Probably all of them, but I'm gonna have to make a list of like ones I'm gonna do first. So probably the mummification last, because that's how I die.
Fair enough, honestly. Maybe you could do like a top 10 or something.
Yeah, we should do
crazy.
top 10 things to celebrate for next year's Easter.
Gosh, alright, well, I guess we're done. I guess we're out of here.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Bye! I like that it only happens like once in a while, where it's like, oh oh, this is the bad Christmas. While being subjected to what the I don't know what was just about to come out of my mouth. So it kind of reminds me of that scene in Game of Thrones, bless you. Appetizing, anybody want some candy? Buzkashi. I don't know, we're just winging it. Got nothing funny to say about that one just sucks. And, Jesus fucking Christ, was I drunk when I wrote this? No, I wasn't. That's the answer to that, but just is not in English.